Hello and welcome. I'm excited to have you here for Help Desk Meet the Consultant. My name is Mixolydia Tyler. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the programs manager at Arts Business Collaborative. We are super excited to have everyone here watching this conversation live and watching the recording later. So just a few things I want to go over before we get into our conversation with our guest consultant. Breaking down what we are doing and what is Help Desk. So Help Desk is a free business consulting program by Arts Business Collaborative. This is a 3-month-long program in the fall designed to provide strategy and individualized pro bono consulting, free business courses through our learning partner with Creative Study, and live in-depth conversations with our Arts Business Network of consultants. We focus on providing free services for POC individuals and organizations that are serving communities of color, especially those belonging to Black, Indigenous, and Hispanic communities. This live Meet the Consultant will be posted automatically on our Arts Business Collaborative YouTube channel. Arts Business Collaborative would like to thank our sponsors. ABC Help Desk is made possible thanks to the generous support of M&T Charitable Foundation, Ameriprise Financial, and the Mertz Gilmer Foundation. We also would like to give a special thanks to Brooke Ottaway of the Nicholas B. Ottaway Foundation. Coming up next at ABC, fiscal sponsorship. Our fiscal sponsorship, or FS Plus program, provides technical support and fiscal sponsorship for organizations that do not have a 501c3 status, but need 501c3 support through grants and other one-on-one individual coaching, as well as programmatic check-ins around an organizational goal or a specific program that your organization is seeking support in. If you're interested in being a part of our FS Plus program, which is already underway, please email us at programs@artsbusinesscollaborative.org. Now to introduce our guest for the evening. Ravon Ruffin is a co-founder and a consultant with Brown Art Inc. She is based in the Bronx, And our superpower is building capacity for community care among BIPOC artists and organizations through digital strategy and storytelling, community building, and media and design. As a community designer and co-founder of Brownout Inc., Ravon reconsiders place and space to more equitably tend to community IRL and URL. Ravon believes in supporting artists and organizations for social good and their capacities to be in and with their communities. As a consultant, Ravon's focus is on narrative building and storytelling. Thank you, Ravon, for having this conversation with me. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can get into it. Welcome. How are you this evening?
I'm good. Hello. How are you?
I'm excited to get into it. There's so many things that I want to talk about, ask more questions about. My first one is really just around the story of Brownout Inc. It's a really revolutionary concept of what you are providing in your organization. And I would just love to know how you and your co-founder kind of got together to think up this idea and how you are currently working in your business.
Yeah. So myself and my co-founder, Amanda Figueroa, have known each other for now, I think 7 years. We came together during grad school, and essentially we're kind of charting a similar path that we didn't know that we were both on, where myself being from Illinois outside of Chicago, she is from El Paso on the border of the US and Mexico, and both had to leave home to pursue higher education, to pursue knowledge, and found ourselves at this institution, this private, majority white institution in DC. And we're studying American studies, which allows you to do a lot of things. So we found our ways through that program. But essentially, we had an opportunity to kind of rethink our position within museums and cultural spaces. And so we actually, although we were in the same program, didn't know each other and had a chance opportunity to have a conversation around just a kind of quiet frustration we were both having. We hadn't really discussed with anyone else or really even with ourselves. But in that moment, we kind of like had an opportunity to like air that frustration. And so I just remember thinking that something wasn't okay in terms of my experiences and relationship to museums, and her having the technical skills while also still navigating her own experiences as a Latina woman. And so at the time I was doing an internship and just feeling all of the aggressions of being a Black woman in a predominantly white space that collects histories and meant to be representative of many a culture in America. And so, I was feeling a lot of those micro and macro aggressions. And so the timing of just meeting her and saying, I actually have, this question and you have these skills, and we're both kind of like in the same space. How can we bridge what we're doing? So I make that sound like a lot more difficult than it really was. We came together and created a blog. It was called Brown Girls Museum Blog, and literally stood on a corner after meeting. It was like, oh, it'll be like 2 brown girls blogging about museums. And that concept, as like cutesy as it sounded, felt like the start of something. We hadn't seen anybody like us. I remember sitting in a meeting, a staff meeting actually at the museum I was interning at, and I was like, we're not getting anything out of this. There's clearly like a power dynamic here that's being set up where they're actually not interested in what the staff has to say. And so I'm just going to do what our ass is doing. I'm going to go on my phone and I want to see who's writing about museums. And, lo and behold, everyone was white. They were middle-aged at that time. And it just wasn't reflecting a very tangible experience that I felt of, being a young Black woman who had to leave her community in a pursuit of something that's meant to provide enrichment to myself and my community, while pursuing a kind of career that my family and folks back home just like don't understand, right? Like, why are you going into grad school to become a museum guide? And not that there is anything wrong with being a museum guide. I've played that role as well, but didn't understand like the vastness of what a space like a museum that we are essentially paying for holds in terms of like possibility. And so, yeah, we started this blog and very quickly found that people just kind of thought we had been around. We're like, we just got here. But we had our little business cards, we had our little color scheme. And I think that, coupled with the fact that it just felt like something that needed to happen. It was without question. It was like, yeah, there needs to be two women of color who are talking about what it means to work in a museum or work in a gallery. What does it look like to build relationships as an artist with curators? And then also thinking about pay equity and like, how do we think about museum workers, equality and pay equity as well. And so, yeah, we were tackling a lot of issues. And I think what we saw was, or what we started to feel, we were writing a lot and started to feel like, well, we wanted to do something. And so we started to do programming, community programming, and really just trying to create platforms for artists and local curators and cultural workers in the DC area. And after that, I think we just kind of outgrew the writing and also just being both in academia, but it didn't feel like the work was done. It felt like we had just discovered what this thing that we had done was really about, which was about community critical work. It was about, or is about, this equity issue around sustainability for artists in terms of creating space for them to have value for their work and space to be artists, and also less about us consulting with these institutions, which were largely white and exhausting to do so, but more about how do we actually support and like building up institutions that deserve a position that they don't often get. And so like supporting them with that kind of capacity to do their work. So I think once we identified that just through our time with Brown Girls Museum blog, it was a natural transition into Brown Art Inc., the kind of like grown-up version of this blog that we have been doing for 3-4 years, maybe more. And really just like anchoring ourselves in community. And so we really try to be a kind of node for institutions or for artists within their community in terms of really supporting them in what are the steps or the processes that are necessary for you to engage with the community around your project, or what are the steps that are needed in terms of really being able to tell your story effectively. And so maybe that looks like your website needing support from us. And so we do web design or supporting you with thinking around your storytelling on social or even in your artist statement, and similarly with organizations. And so, I'm really excited that Brown Art Inc. has been able to find a really specific niche within the creative ecosystem, because it really has been about sustainability from the onset and really thinking about it as an ecosystem of that. All of these pieces are serving each other. And when one of them is out of balance, it doesn't support what we're all trying to do in a really like healthy and holistic way.
I really appreciate how you are framing community work. And I just want to call that to attention just because as someone who's worked in different organizations in their community departments, community sometimes is a kind of catch-all phrase for minority communities or marginalized communities at large. Do you know what I mean? And I think that this work is really for everyone. Like if we always worked. And so I just want to ask my next question of just about how you frame with your partners' community work, and what are some maybe guidelines to doing that
Mhm.
work? Because in help desk, I know there's a lot of arts organizations and like grassroots organizations, right? They say we
Mhm.
do community work, but that again sometimes can mean many different things to many
Yeah.
different people. And larger institutions, it's the catch-all for the marginalized. But I
Right.
think that there is something very rich in thinking it with a community kind of pedagogy
Mhm.
in mind. And so I would love to hear what your pedagogy is for community and how you really define. I'm hearing it, but I would just love for you to define
Yeah. Yeah.
more. And then how, what are the steps or how do you kind of start to build, space for artists to either connect or to get connect, to be more visible to the communities they want.
Yeah. Yeah, and I so appreciate that question, and I love you bringing in pedagogy as a way of thinking about it. Um, I think, yeah, so much of what you're saying, I've worked in many an education or public programs department, and even within, digital engagement departments, whether they're couched within education, within the museum as a whole. There is a kind of, there's definitely the desire and what has become a watered down phrase of community engagement. And so you either see where it has become a kind of catch-all and we're kind of just like blanketing that over everyone. Or yeah, there's the coded part of it, in which we know who we're talking about, we're not being explicit. And so I think in all of that, the issue is the lack of explicit language around who we're actually trying to reach. And so I think we do ourselves a disservice when we pretend as though we're able to be everything to everyone. And so even within my work with Amanda at Bronner Inc., early on, there was so much excitement and the idea that like we could try to do so much. And it was like, let someone else do that. Like we actually are going to burn ourselves out. And also that's not our calling. That's not our ministry. Like this is what we do over here. And this is what we do right now. And maybe it'll change, maybe it'll
Right.
evolve, but really being true. So I think a lot of it is around mission, right? And vision of like what you're even trying to situate yourself or where you're trying to situate yourself, right? And so that's often when I'm first talking to someone that I'm consulting with is like, what is your mission? What is your organizational statement and position? Because that right there tells you so much about how you should be relating yourself to your community. And it seems so simple, but it's fascinating to see how quickly we get removed from that, right? And I think in terms of how I try to think about my relationship to community, which has had to really get very refined over the years, is that I don't belong to every community. I belong to very specific communities. Just because I am a Black woman, I know that I am not positioned to be a part of every circle. And so I think that also just supports the fact that when we have these kind of calls for DEI or whatever alphabet
Yo, there's so many.
we're calling it today, it's not just automatically the Black and the brown folks who can just do that work, right? Like there are questions that we have to start to ask. And I think it's been interesting to kind of like feel like I moved away from what was my earlier practice in anthropology to like find that has actually guided so much of my work. And then similarly, Amanda has a practice in anthropology and ethnography. And so I think so much of our pedagogy is couched in a kind of a community focused kind of research of, what are the questions that we actually need to come with versus, you know, coming with the kind of invitation. And that's always been my propagation to museums, is that you're actually not, in terms of community engagement or outreach, you're actually not inviting people in. You actually have to go out because you're actually in their community. And so, yeah, when I think about community and like how to define that, is really about asking questions and listening and positioning yourself alongside folks. And I think for artists, it's again another what seems like a very simple ask, but oftentimes they're just, especially when you're talking about many of the communities that I come from and that I choose to work with, it's just even knowing that there's artists in your community. And so I think, you see those kind of relationships that happen naturally, but people just needing to know that you exist and building
Yes.
those relationships, right? And like, so much of the work that we did early on and continue to try to push through is really just having conversations between community and artists and bridging those two groups, because oftentimes it's just the ways in which that an artist, not only lives next door, but they use the library to inform their work, and they're actually making work about their neighbor and those kind of things. And so
Right.
all of that is an ecosystem, right? And so like those are the things that we want to illuminate of, actually there's so much that is holding each other up, that the artist actually is in relationship and drawing so much inspiration from their community, and then they're going off into these spaces and telling the story of their community, and then these spaces are funding the artists to be in this other space. So like just thinking about how we create these kind of like cyclical ecosystems that feed into each other, but so much of that is just about relationships. And so you think about an artist like Jordan Castile, who is painting her neighborhood in Harlem. That's just such a beautiful example of the ways that like artists live among us. And when we start to bridge those kinds of conversations and relationships, we start to draw so much rich oral history, or like start to draw attention to the ways that like our communities need certain kinds of care, right? But I also don't want to oversimplify that and make that sound really simple, when, again, to my earlier point of having to leave home, right, to pursue certain resources, it's the same often for artists of color, right, of having to leave their communities that they draw this inspiration from to find capital, to find, recognition. And so much of that has to, in a sense, I mean, I don't want to sound dramatic, but I do think it decimates our communities in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. Of our resources get drawn out of our communities so that we can pursue these other spaces that don't often pour back into our community. So how can we make that a possibility, that instead of I have to move to New York, from where I live in the Midwest to pursue my art career, that actually you can support me from right here and create a flourishing art ecosystem here. So I think, I think all of that ties into how I'm thinking about community and how we keep communities intact. And so much of that is just about relationships and valuing people to keep them in connection to each other, instead of it always being a drawing away of resources.
I would love to talk this. There's so much that you just beautifully shared. I wanted to go deeper into this last thing that you just said around how do we create creative ecosystems within the communities that we are serving, because I think that is, I see so many young people who are saying, I can't afford to go away to do this thing. But I know that this is the place that I'm going to get the training or get the knowledge. And I know that was definitely true when I was coming through, but I also am seeing a large shift in areas and communities saying, and people just saying, look, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to go into debt to pay this institution. I'm going to figure it out on my own. And I think that's where a lot of this entrepreneurial spirit has come up in many, and I would say specifically young Black women. I've seen so many of them that I've talked to, interacted with through my work, have just said, listen, I'm trying to make this business here. I think I'm here. I can't afford anymore to live, outside of my home. And I think, like the idea of living at home is not so much of a taboo anymore, because it's expensive. And so to a young entrepreneur who is saying, I want to find ways to serve and do what I am passionate about here in my community, what are some maybe first steps? I know that you just shared about really getting clear about your mission and vision and the storytelling behind that. I just would love to hear more of your thoughts around, like, what does that really mean? What are the practical, like actionable steps to doing that? in order to have that ecosystem you talk about?
Yeah. I'm trying to avoid like gearing into the context of your question because there's so much there. But in terms of, I'm like thinking about segregation, I'm all over the place. But to stay close to what you just asked me, in terms of some of those, I guess, first actionable steps you can really take, and placekeeping is what I like to say. I mean, I think some of it is what I said, just to continue what I said of just building those relationships and, knowing who your community is that you are intending to serve. And so again, there should just be a lot of questions at that stage. Going in, knowing that there's so much that we don't know about who is among us, how things are evolving, what your community needs, especially if you're trying to be a part of the intergenerational kind of conversation, right? And so I think that's just feels like a little bit of a lost art in a lot of the ways that we do our work. And then I think also I'm thinking about really just identifying like what are kind of the natural ways that your community is actually utilizing space. And I say that to say that I think oftentimes in terms of that pursuit, the idea of having to kind of like replicate what we're seeing in other spaces. And that's not always necessary, I think. And I think there's a lot of people who do a good job of this, of like tailoring it right to where you are. But yeah, I mean, if your community, is on the stoop, like what does that look like? Like what does it look like to meet them where they are? Or if the Stop and Shop is, where they get their information, they're getting their dailies, they're getting their groceries, they're, in the parking lot, like how can we meet folks where they are? And so I think, there has to be a little bit more of a connective tissue in terms of like what we're trying to build and what we're trying to solve for. And so I think sometimes we can like be a little bit misguided in terms of, I want to create that thing that looks like this, or like, why can't we have that? Whereas again, just really keeping the mission and the focus very much place-based, and not that whatever the intention is can't grow or to build to something that can hopefully one day rival these more metropolitan areas or whatever the idea may be, right? But I think it's really just staying true to who your audience is. And so I think if you can stay true to that intention, I can see the ways that that'll just really keep folks grounded and not getting ahead of ourselves. Because I think also too, just thinking on a community level, it starts so granular. And so like, maybe it is just a table with some books on it at first. And like, let's just see, how folks are feeling about that. And like, how can we create a conversation? And then maybe it grows into, a regular stint somewhere at someone's coffee shop. And then maybe that grows into your own brick and mortar. So some of this is just like, business practice, but I think also in terms of like really sustaining arts and culture, I'm just thinking about the ways that like, just try it, just try it because it's needed. And if you're thinking about it, someone else is probably thinking about it. And there's so many gaps that we need to fill. And so I commend anyone who is really trying to buck the system and keep hold on to their cultural wealth within their community, because I think we need more of that. And to really, again, I think it's just bringing attention to the cause. I think so often we hold onto our idea, or we think our idea is too big. And I think if we just try it on a community level, the buy-in, like, like that is all you need to show that there is a viable, whatever it is. I'm like thinking about anybody who wants to start some kind of like library or a gallery, like whatever that looks like. Start it in your living room, start it at someone's space, but we need that because people need spaces for representation, and not everybody is going to make it to the MoMAs and the Mets and the things of that nature. And not everybody needs to. Like, let's start centering ourselves around some of these more alternative spaces, so that we are allowing, different ideas or different understandings of visibility and critique, like let's
Yeah.
open the door to other ways of gathering in these spaces. And I think you had a second question, which I might have forgotten.
Yeah, I think just to restate, it was so the kind of the precursor question that you beautifully answered was really around like what is the thought, what are the steps around that? And it's really like the
Mm-hmm.
inquiry based asking
Yeah.
questions
Yeah.
and then really thinking about space in a different way
Mm-hmm.
that's really connected to where your community, where you want to be. Right.
Mm-hmm.
You don't, if you're really pushing back against going away to then be in a larger, connect to a larger
Mm-hmm.
institution, what can you do here? And where are the people that you want to
Yeah.
serve? How do you meet them there? And keep, and just and trying things like that. Third part
Yeah.
is like, and just trying something and starting small. Those are
Mm-hmm.
3 actionable steps you can really do community work and be in the
Yeah.
community you want to serve in a felt way.
Mm-hmm.
The other part of that was really just around like what let me say, make sure I say this correctly. What would you say to someone who is, thinking about like, or kind of teetering between this, like, do I go away? Do I stay here? And I love what you said earlier about, not necessarily coming with what I want to do, but what
Mm-hmm.
question do I have? Or what
Mm-hmm.
frustration do I have? Like
Mm-hmm.
questioning myself and then questioning and having questions for the people that I want to serve to better understand how I can serve them. And
Yeah.
so, so what would you say to someone who's like, this is the thing I want to do and I want
Yeah.
to go, but I'm not sure where, or, my community could be anywhere. And how do they kind of start
Mm-hmm.
to really, like you say, kind of edit themselves
Mm-hmm.
to doing things that are sustainable,
Yeah.
ideas.
Yeah, I mean, of course it depends on, what the project is or the idea is, but um I mean, maybe this gets back to what I was saying earlier, just around mission and vision, right? Where even thinking about my work with Amanda, like we don't have an office space, we don't have a physical space. Like we're very much identified as nomadic, and being able to be where our community is when we need to be there. And so it really is about getting very clear on how we intend to show up, how we intend to do our work. And we've had to do a lot of editing. We have retreats twice a year to really like get very clear on,
Love that.
has the mission changed? Has the vision changed? Do we still do this anymore? Like those kind of things, like don't be afraid to like check in with yourself, and those things can change. And I feel like we've, done that over the years to a place where I feel really solid, and maybe we need to tweak a little bit here or there, but I don't think we need to do any more overhauls because we've gotten very clear on how we want to do our work, which has very clear components that we list on our website so that people are not misconstrued about who we are or what kind of work that we do. And so I think it's really about, and I advise on this all the time of, have that brainstorming session, have that vision setting session with yourself, with your team, and just see what sticks. Like, what are the words that when you're just having a conversation with your team or yourself, or family or friends, what are the words that are coming up? How are you describing what you do? Like, and I say that also just because not as only an organizational tool, but also as a way to like remind ourselves of like the passion that brings us to this work. Because I think if we're talking about being in these art and cultural spaces, especially as folks of color, like, burnout is always 2 steps behind us. And, many other a thing that will spin us out of these spaces that we're in. And so really reminding, like bringing that zest back into the work that you do and getting people excited. So I love to always start with that as a first step. And again, it seems simple, but the way that I find I get so much more invigorated about the kind of work that I do. And it takes less of that, the bureaucracy that tends to become the work, right? Of like, we're always trying to find a grant. We're always trying to find, like we're always going to be looking for money. We're always going to be looking for how to, like get bigger, get our message out there. How do we get more followers? But like once we do that visioning statement, right? Like none of that matters anymore. Like that will come because actually what's important here is the fact that we decided that above all else, we support, this X, Y, and Z, right? And like, as long as we stand true to form to that, like we will find the ways to find that capital, right? Or we will find our audience, right? But it's really about honing in. Again, that gets back to what was said earlier, of like, you can't be everything to everyone, right? And so, regardless of if you see yourself as being grounded in a particular place around a certain time, or see yourself as being able to speak to, a wider audience of folks, regardless of place, there's still a way that you can situate yourself and be very clear about how you enter into conversation, into agreement, right, with partners. So those kind of things become very essential as you start to, start a practice or your business. I think as you start to move into these spaces, you just want to be very clear around, what that vision and that value is, right? Or someone will create that for you. And so doing that for yourself. Right. And again, like I said, you can iterate, so it can evolve, but have something that you can stand on, so that you always kind of know what is your North Star. And from there, I think that everything that you're doing, whether it is funding, again, social media, storytelling, all of those pieces can start to organically shape themselves. Because again, this is all growing from this mission and vision. So I see all of this about a kind of criticality that you have to have with yourself and your work around your vision, that will really make your work very specific. And so it doesn't have to be, geographically situated, but really situating yourself within the communities that you want to be a part of or support.
And I really love that you called it visioning. And that it's active. It's something that you have to continue to do, but
Absolutely.
it needs to start first. And that if I'm questioning, where do I go? What do I do? How do I, it's like all those questions have to will fall into place once you just spent time visioning. Exactly. And this is connected to what Ronte was saying a few weeks ago, of just like, if you're not thinking about all of the things around what you want to do and really creating language for it, you're just doing yourself a disservice, because it will happen. You will have employees if that's where you're headed. You will, and you're not thinking about the language and the vision for that. It can be, a catch-up game. That's what,
and it quickly becomes, non-sustainable, and quickly you're suddenly at meetings and you're like, why am I here? Like, what is this?
Right. What am I doing? What do I?
Right. Like, when do we agree that this is what we do? And it can quickly get, spin out of control. And like, I see this so often with organizations of color and artists of color. Like we want the visibility. We want, to be in positions to, start to build resources, capital, all of that. And so quickly we start to stretch ourselves too thin. And so really, really getting focused and honed in around that, will just bring you so much more peace, truly.
And I'm just going to say, and take a little bit of a pause to do some shameless promotion. You need partners in visioning. This is why Help Desk is here, because I think visioning is not just something you do by yourself.
Absolutely.
And I believe that the work that you and Amanda do with Brown Art Inc. as consultants as well, and offering up your time and services, are just great free ways for you to really sit and have these talks, because visioning is an active process.
Absolutely.
In the beginning for sure, but you kind of got to do that throughout to make sure we're staying in alignment with our mission and vision if it's already been established, or if we're pivoting, then what is the language?
Absolutely.
So I really want to get, because I've had this question for a little bit, and I was like, let me make sure I get there. In your bio, and I forgive me because I'm very not well-versed in sometimes certain acronyms. So, but you really stress storytelling, and I would love to talk about, your thought process around like, what is that entail? Like, what do
Mhm.
you bring to helping someone create their story?
Mhm.
And this language you used around community IRL and URL, and
Mhm.
how that influences your storytelling. That is the question.
Yeah. I mean, so IRL in real life, URL online. And so
Thank
that is
you.
how yeah, absolutely. And for anyone else. But I try to use that as much as possible just to connect those two spaces that I'm always thinking about. And so when I'm talking about community, when I'm talking about doing community critical work, about doing work that is situated in space and place, I'm thinking about both our IRL reality, and I'm also thinking about how we relate to each other online. And so I think most, if not all of what I already said, can and should be applied to the digital space. And so oftentimes I think an interesting challenge for organizations or folks who are trying to expand their work that I'm working with, they are often feeling this kind of like disconnect between their in-person practice and their online practice, right? Like, how do I communicate what I do so beautifully here? The people are my face, they see me, they understand what I'm doing. I can, talk in these ways, I can maneuver in this way, and people are following versus, now I get online and like, how do people find me? Like, how do I, shift to this space without losing the authenticity that I have when I am existing in physical space. And so I think so much of what I'm trying to do is really just like close that gap, because I don't think it actually needs to be as disparate as it feels for folks. Of course, there's just the reality, right, of like, I'm posting and like the very real reality that like is something different from most folks when I'm talking to them, their practice, right? Like the stopping and having to actually post. But I think what I'm more so interested in is really getting people to understand that they have a community that exists online, and it's really just about connecting with them in the same ways that you would want to connect with them in person. And so I really try to advise folks to not stay away or try to become an avatar of themselves unless that's what they're interested in. If that's your practice, then I want to support that as well.
Right.
But more often than not, I'm dealing with folks who are trying to make social media an extension of their practice. And so I really just try to get people to situate themselves again in like, what is your statement as an artist? Like, what is the message here that you're trying to convey, and how can we invite people into that in a way that translates to the digital, right? Like, it may not always match one-to-one, so how can we actually make it so that you are using the tool in a way that best supports what you're trying to do? And so I'm always down for people hacking the tool. So I don't even want to say like use the tool in the way that it was intended, but more so, if we're talking about Instagram, like if you're someone who, I'm trying to think of a good example, but exist in these spheres around like music and storytelling, history,
Yes.
like how can we actually take this tool that allows you to disseminate that message, right? And so many folks get the easy part of like, yeah, I go and I sing and I perform, and like there's the the video that you can easily put up, but then like, how can we actually dig deeper? Because yeah, there's going to be the people who are
Mm,
going to come and watch you perform, right? Or the people who
right.
love you as an artist, and then there's going to be the people who are never going to see you in person. They might not hear about you as a singer, but then like, what is actually the connective tissue to your practice as a performer? Oh, actually, you're drawing from this inspiration. How can we actually make that a kind of like content stream for you, that you're letting people know that actually I'm inspired by hip hop artists of the 1980s, and let's talk about that tension of that era of like what things were looking like. And so like creating content alongside your performances and things like that, right? Like I usually just try to break down like, what actually are you already doing that is actually just a kind of content stream that is telling people a story about you and allowing us to go deeper. And so there's that aspect, right, of Now I'm starting to understand you as an artist, as a human, as a performer, and all the many things that you may be, through these different lenses that support your work, but also from a, you know, an analytical standpoint, what I'm now doing is actually reaching audiences that are very specific to these different content streams, right? So like there is the person that's going to know you as the artist, as the singer or whatever, who is going to follow you as a fan of that. And maybe they'll get this other information from you now, right? And like that's going to make them love you more. But then there's going to be the person who I only know this person as a person who posts nostalgic imagery of 1980s hip hop. And like, that's my thing, you know?
Yes.
And now I'm learning about you as an artist, but cool. I'm here for this history. And like, as long as I get to participate in that, like now I'm understanding you as the individual, right? So I just start to try to like piece out for people like where they already have stories, not that we're trying to invent a story, but that you already have a story. And so how can you start to organize your presence, your online presence around that? And so again, just trying to stay as close as possible to your authentic experience or presence, but really start to branch out into, well, what actually exists within your practice that you're not actually giving voice to is usually often what happens. So I'm usually not like trying to invent new content streams for anybody. I don't want to give anybody any more work. And also the idea is that I don't want you to be stressed about this extension to your practice, because I actually want you to just be able to focus on doing the work. And so how can we actually streamline everything that you're doing online to map onto how you exist in the world? And so oftentimes there's that large piece. And then I think that step back of, okay, here are all of the spaces that you have stories that you can be telling. And
Mhm.
now how do we like organize that for you? And oftentimes it's people getting overwhelmed because they're posting on a whim and
Yes.
they feel the pressure of having to be on all the time. And what I try to support is actually there's a way in which you can structure this, whether it is a content calendar or again, going back to that mission. I try to support people down to, you know, there's the organizational or institutional kind of mission and vision, and then like what is your actual vision for being on these spaces. And so we actually create templates through Brown Art Inc. that people can download to support you, and like, and they're free. So you should just be able to download a document that has these broken down of like, what is your goal, what is your objective towards those goals, and now how do I want to break down what that means for each of these platforms, right? And so this is when you can start to get very specific about your communities, right? Like if I'm posting to Instagram and that's the space I want to be on, and I know it's a image and video forward platform, like here's the kind of content and stories that I want to tell here, right? Versus like a TikTok where it's going to be quick, it's going to be, you know, quickly generated kind of content. All right, maybe I take that longer caption and video that I posted, and now it's just a little snippet about the history of the 1980s. And maybe that's my only thing on there, right? Like that's the content that's going to draw people because this is a space that loves tidbits of information that connect them to something bigger. So that's when you can start to like make sense, because I think a lot of people are looking into the forest of the digital landscape. And so I try to help people start to see the landscape from a little bit more of a grounded view, and structure themselves, because I think something Amanda and I really love to push is like systems. Systems are there to support us. And if we can put them in place early on, we do a lot of that work in the beginning and we don't have to do it again. And so how can
Yeah.
we do that work for ourselves early? And that can be, again, this document that really guides you in structuring your content. And then also, you know, doing that visioning work. And then what are those stories now that we've done that mission and vision work that we can then start to break down how we tell that story, right? And so people often just tend to get overwhelmed by, you know, seeing all this stuff coming at them from social media, but then also not having a place to start. And so I try to just give folks a place to start.
I love the scaffolding that you are sharing too. I think this is so important. I'm just going to highlight it again, that like from this vision, once we realize what that is and your mission and vision and the things that you say that you do, your values, right? You can start to use those things to then better understand like maybe even which platforms that you really are going to flourish in, or they're really going to
Yeah.
help you tell whatever these stories are that are connected to.
Exactly. And maybe you do it and you find out I don't actually need to be on that platform. There's also that.
Right.
It's the ability to start saying no to certain things too, right?
That's correct. And then the automation part of it that I really
Mhm.
love is that, like, once you've kind of moved from those steps of mission and visioning to what are the stories that are involved in that, and then what are the platforms I can use
Mhm.
to find my online audience, then it really is about how do I automate those things, because it doesn't need to be overwhelming. There are so many
Exactly.
ways that, like you said, an IG story can then be shortened to being a TikTok, right? Or
Mhm.
an IG makes it very simple because it's all meta, right? The metaverse. So they're like, it will
Mhm.
automatically go to your Facebook if that's where you feel like you also have an audience.
Right.
And just understanding those platforms and having a thought partner like Brown Art Inc. to do that is so, I think it's invaluable. Because I think that a lot of people do burn out. I think the where I see burn out the most is really trying to
Mhm.
create or keep up an
Yeah.
persona or presence that
Yeah.
maybe is not connected to their mission and vision. So it feels like
Exactly.
extra work. They've got to create something, build something from scratch. It really doesn't have to be that. It
Yeah.
really can be something very woven in to
Mhm.
how they work and how they build community in these different spaces. I
Absolutely.
really want to get into some of the kind of the inspiration for the work that you do,
Mm.
and specifically thinking about, there's just so many terms and ways of thinking about economics now,
Mm.
solidarity economy, alternate
Mhm.
economies, and just really trying to understand how to break free from some of the systems that
Mm.
frustrate us as people of color. And so I guess it's a two-part question. First, what are your inspirations from these
Mm.
new ways of thinking about economy and building capital that is equitable and sustainable
Mhm.
in your work? And how do those influences kind of build what you would say to someone who is saying, I'm frustrated? Uh,
Mm.
business in general, but definitely in arts business, I'm seeing this racial lens that really keeps me from getting
Mm.
access to resources, and I'm feeling the burnout, I'm feeling the discouragement, and I don't know if I don't know how to continue uh,
Mm.
in the way that I'm being told will be successful, right?
Right.
And so what would you say to that? What are your influences, uh, in the way that you think about economy, building, capital and having an equitable economy for
Mhm.
creatives? And then how would you advise someone who is coming with those frustrations?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in terms of inspiration, I mean, I do draw a lot of inspiration from the solidarity economy and that movement. I think also now I'm thinking a lot about DAOs, and I would like to understand more of, you know, what's going on over there in that space. And I'm thinking, I think just largely about sharing economies of how do we, when I think about DAOs that I have looked into of like bartering systems, right? And like, how do we start to create these kind of alternative economies that allow us to distribute resources in a way that are more equitable and also reach our communities, right? Um, I think in terms of what I would say to that person, I mean, those frustrations are certainly felt. I think, funny enough, a lot of what has been said does feel relevant to that of, not being everything to everybody. I think over the years, myself and Amanda have had to be very selective that certain things just aren't worth our time. Like, and the price tag might be nice, but we don't have the energy and the resource to apply for this grant, right? Like, it will do more of disservice for us to spend the amount of hours and time that it will take us to do that grant than to not. So I think it's getting, again, very selective around the capital that we maneuver ourselves toward, so that we are making better use of our time, of our energy, of our resources. I think, as much as you can. I mean, we of course maybe come from a more privileged place of, Brown Art Inc. isn't paying our full salaries, but I think even still, like, that requires us to be very precious of, as much as we would love to go after everything that feels relevant to us, how do we actually be sustainable with our time between, our very tiny team of the three of us.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's that aspect of really getting real, and not going after every grant. The $5,000 ones seem nice, but if they're asking for you to jump through hoops, like, that's not a good use of your time. Preserve
Right.
that time for the $500,000 one. And even though it might seem bigger, at least you have, put forth your energy towards that one that will allow you to put together something that will be really robust. And when it is time to apply for something else, now you're ready, versus like this one that like maybe asks for certain things that feel tangential to what you're doing, but
Right.
isn't going to have, the greatest of rewards. So I think it's really start to evaluate your time a little bit more, your resources, so that we can preserve our energy. A lot of us are, as folks of color in these spaces, on the hamster wheel of chasing capital. And, we're not producing our best work that way. We just aren't. And so I think there's that. I think there's also the fact that we could be doing a lot better. And I've seen it in certain spaces where we are, but doing better work of like really just sharing when you get a grant. Like, I think that's something we've definitely.
Please, can you say more about that, please? Because
Yeah, I
I
mean,
agree, and we at ABC agree in
yeah. I
this.
mean, I've worked in a few spaces, and when I'm thinking about supporting artists in terms of sustainability, that's one of the programs that I love constructing the most is how do we all go in on this grant together, and then let's talk about what that process was, and then let's also talk about, like, if we got it, like, what were those things that were flagged that we saw might be differing from how we're applying from the grant. So I think there's those kinds of things that get back to community, right? And like situating yourself within community, making yourself available to community, right? So I think in terms of that listening versus coming with certain assumptions, right? There's also that within all of that is a kind of vulnerability. And so I think we have to get off of that mindset of that, like, we're the only ones doing this, or that there's not enough to go around even to. And so to actually get in a space where we're actually saying, hey, I applied for this thing and I didn't get it, or I did apply to this thing and I got it, and I like to share and make that available.
Right.
And there are some folks who do that, and I applaud that, because that is where we get to a space where a kind of abundance mindset versus a scarcity model, which is what so much philanthropy is, what so much the nonprofit industrial complex is really about scarcity, right? That there's only so much room for so many people, and we're all fighting for scraps. And
Correct.
so how do we actually shift? And some of this is about community value, right? Of actually everything we need exists within our communities, mutual aid. And so creating networks that allow us to share resources, whether that be a Slack or a text group or whatever, but creating spaces where we're actually just sharing resources. I think it's so much of it, the information is all there. And many of us are applying to the same things, which is also where we need to just link up instead of, all five of us applying to this grant that's already getting split up in so many different ways. How do we actually link up and make ourselves more favorable, but also make sure we're getting as much of the resources as possible? So I think a lot of it, again, is, I guess, to recap, is just to really be mindful of our own time and resources, and evaluating that, right, a little bit more strictly, so that we aren't burning ourselves out, and being organized around when we apply, what we're applying to, and making that the most value for our time. I would rather have to go, dig deep to get that
Yes.
$500,000 grant
Yes.
than to be scattered trying to get $10,000. It sounds nice, but is it worth our time? And then I think, again, it's really about us opening up opening up our resources to each other. And so, where we can, and this is why Brown Art Inc. makes, we have a resource and tool segment on our website. We get nothing out of hoarding this information. So
Right.
why would I not want you to have a template for how to do your work? If we want to talk further about it, we could talk about,
Yeah.
what those steps look like. But of course, like, here's something to get you started, so that you even have a direction. Please take that. So I think it's really about open access around, these knowledge, and these resources, that really should be circulating among ourselves and our community. So getting
Sure.
situated within the community that you're in, and it might just have to be you that starts that conversation, right? Of, here's the application that I submitted, and so, like, having more of those kind of like community, what do I want to say, like community reinforced or community valued kind of,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, feedback sessions, critique sessions, and things like that, where we're actually starting with our community first before, outsourcing all of this information and just, hoping that they pick us. Like, how can we actually galvanize around resources so that we're not all fighting for, these scraps?
And what I love is that these places, these ways that we can, I should say, go into places digitally as well as, like you said, in real life. Like, your
Mm-hmm.
library is a valuable place to access resources. Your community board meetings, and even like your block associations, there will be
Absolutely.
resources. And I remember, I don't want to get too emotional because this person was very near and dear to me, and I lost them through COVID. But
Mm-hmm.
this woman made it her point to keep me connected in my community. She was like, you're a young Black creative, and I just want you to know that there are these resources. And if something, and she was our Black president, and her name was Miss Tila, and she just made it a point to make sure I knew where to access. Where she's like, if you wanted to start, the community center right here has free business classes at night, or the school opens in the evenings and they're having talks about this, and I just thought you should know because this is something that's connected to what you do. And that, like, in real life, those sharing of resources exist, which are right in line with the thoughts of our solidarity economy and DAOs.
Absolutely.
Like,
Absolutely.
how are we not just thinking about monetary exchanges, but also just like knowledge exchange? And how are we openly not holding on to that? Because that's what the system does in business. Is like, well, if I keep everything for myself, then I will rise to the top. When really it's like a brick that can make you sink as well, right? That actually we are sharing things and we all can sustain and maybe float, right? And so I really believe in this. It exists in real life and it exists digitally as well. There are many places that you can go. And if you don't know, I'm doing a shameless plug again for help desk, because if you don't know where to go to find those resources, to learn about what grants are maybe in line with your mission and vision, this is why help desk exists. This is why ABC exists too, with our fiscal sponsorship program, is really a way to spread resources and knowledge, as well as capital, sharing the grants that we get, or the grants that you may be able to access, just don't have 501c3 status to have. So I think all of that is important. I'm so glad that we ended on this note of just really thinking strategically, but also sustainably around how you can best, work in your business, even as an artist, as an individual, LLC, or a larger business, and how to kind of think about that in a strategic way. Ravon, has been a joy.
Thank you. You have some great questions. This was fun.
Your mind has been a joy to like hear how you think and share. So I appreciate your time and all of the knowledge you dropped. And I hope you have a great night. Before I go, let me because I need to do this right. I'm going to share my screen again. If you would like to be a part of Help Desk, it is a free service. You can sign up now. We have 1 month left, the month of November, to get involved and get connected. If you would like to register for one-on-one consulting with Ravon, she is more than available and has time. And there's a QR code right on my screen. You can put your phone up to it and scan it and get started right away. And we'd love to have you. So with that said, thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Mhm.
Thank you and have a great night.